Good morning. I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, tragedy in the Bronx, a community in mourning after New York City's deadliest fire in decades. This morning, at least 19 people are dead, 9 of the victims children, after flames ripped through a high-rise apartment complex, sending thick black smoke throughout the 19-story building.
It got to the point that at the last minute we couldn't breathe.
And the people in all the window crying for help, help, help. No fire escape.
We have the latest developments this morning on what caused the fire and why the smoke spread so quickly. Remembering Bob Saget, shock and sadness in the entertainment world following the sudden death of comedian and actor Bob Saget, best known as the beloved single dad in 90s sitcom Full House and as a longtime host of America's Funniest Home Videos. He was just 65 years old. A look back at his career as the tributes pour in this morning. FACEOFF, high-stakes talks to avoid an all-out war. Today, the U.S. and Russia set to meet over the growing threat of a Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have team coverage this morning from the White House to Moscow and Geneva as the U.S. and NATO work together to de-escalate tensions with 100,000 Russian troops gathered at the Ukrainian border. Kids at risk. Startling new statistics in the fight against COVID. Child hospitalizations in the U.S. have more than doubled in just the last 2 weeks. A look at what could be behind the spike as the country struggles to overcome the Omicron surge. And real-life superhero, from fighting crime to giving hope, how a Texas police officer is going above and beyond the call of duty to serve the kids in his community. That will be a good kickoff to your week, but we begin this morning with heartbreak here in New York City. A fire killed more than a dozen people, including children, in a Bronx apartment building and left more than 60 others hurt. It's one of the deadliest fires the city's seen in decades. New York's fire commissioner says a malfunctioning electric space heater sparked the flames in the 19-story building Sunday morning. Nearly 200 firefighters responded to the scene. In the aftermath, the city's new mayor, Eric Adams, and New York State Governor Kathy Hochul said they would rally behind the victims.
This is going to be one of the worst fires that we have witnessed during modern times here in the city of New York.
It is such a tragedy, thinking of children, thinking of families, thinking of so many people in this building, immigrants striving to climb that ladder up, and their lives snuffed out. It's awful. I want to thank our firefighters. Unbelievable. They always rush to danger.
NBC News correspondent Isa Gutierrez joins us now from on the ground in the Bronx. Isa, good morning. So we know officials say this fire started because of a space heater, but we're also hearing about what went wrong that allowed the fire and smoke to spread so quickly, whip throughout this whole building, doing so much damage, causing so many fatalities. Tell us about those details. What have we learned?
That's right, Savannah. Good morning. So what the fire commissioner said is that investigators were able to determine that this fire caused by a malfunctioning space heater, like you said, actually started in a two-story unit that was on the second and third floor of this 19-story building. Now, the issue, they said that they found based on physical evidence as well as accounts from residents, is that that apartment door was open. And what that allowed to happen with the fire is that it was able to spread into the hallway. After that fire spread into the hallway, the smoke then engulfed the entire building. And as we know, it was that smoke that really did the damage here. Like you said, nearly 200 firefighters responded to the scene yesterday. They actually ran out of oxygen in trying to rescue all of the residents who were stuck in this building trying to get out. Those images, just tragic. Those firefighters trying to hoist out the victims through the windows, down ladders to get to safety. Many of them were not able to get to safety yesterday. Savannah.
And Issa, this is the deadliest fire in New York since 1990. There are 19 fatalities here with this fire. Tell us what we know about the victims.
Well, Savannah, we're expecting to hear an update from officials in just the next few hours. But what we know is that right now, 19 people died in this fire here yesterday, 9 of them children, dozens still at various hospitals in the city, many of them fighting for their lives, primarily from smoke inhalation. We also heard from the Red Cross. They said that they're working with over 20 families who've been displaced from their apartments. We also heard from officials that many families were staying in the area overnight, hoping to get back into their apartments, but it's unclear right now whether it'll be safe for them to do so. Savannah.
All right, Isa Gutierrez, thank you so much for the latest from the ground there. And joining us now is Nakia Gonzalez. She was a resident at that building. Nakia is with us this morning to walk us through exactly what her experience was. Nakia, good morning. First of all, just tell us, how are you doing this morning? We're so sorry for what you've been through. Tell us how you are.
Me and my family are staying with our aunt right now, and we're doing okay for right at this moment.
All right.
We have people checking on us, you know, a lot.
Oh, that's great to hear. It's good that you have that community around you. So take us back to Sunday. First, just tell us, where were you when the fire started? Where is your apartment in relation to where this began? And what did you see?
2 stories up on the 6th floor. The alarms went off in the building, and normally, you know, sometimes they do, but you can get them, the security can get them to turn off. And when it came right back on, you know, when they turn it off, you start to wonder, is something wrong? And then by the 3rd time, they couldn't get them to stay off. You know, my husband's friend called and said, you know, there's people in the window screaming help. So by the time we got the citizens alert to say it was a fire 50 feet from us, my husband got up and opened the door, and the hallway was getting smoky. And he said, throw on something. And by the time I went to wake up my 2 nieces and we put on just a coat and shoes, it was so black and smoky, we couldn't even get out the house. We had to go right back in and also help neighbors that were trying to leave their houses from higher floors that were trying to come down because it was so dark that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. So we just let some people in and we closed the door, and we tried to put wet towels and rags around the door on our face, but it just got so black and smoky. You know, we was coughing and choking. I was trying to move people around, put them in, you know, rooms where, you know, the bathroom where there was no windows, or, you know, a side closet. And it was just so scary, and, you know, just trying to make sure that we got out all right.
Absolutely. And so, Nakia, am I understanding right that the way that you understood that there was this fire happening in your very own building was from that app, Citizen, that notifies people of some type of activity around them?
It started with the alarm for the building, the fire alarm for the building, and then the Citizens app, and then every fire alarm in my apartment. We have one in each room and one in the hallway and the kitchen and the living room, and everything just started going off so crazy, and just it wouldn't stop. But the fire department couldn't take us out because they were trying to put out the fire. Right. So once they were able to get us safely through, they knocked on the doors and we was able to open. They said, you know, just they showed us the light to the stairs, just follow it till you get downstairs and you see light. It's just like hold on to the walls and walk in the dark until you can get out.
Wow. And Nakia, one of the things that we've heard from residents, we actually played some sound at the top of our show with a resident saying this, is that there were not fire escapes on this building. So what was that process of evacuation like? Were those halls crowded on your way out as you're going through this smoke? Were a lot of other residents on their way down?
It was, you really can't tell how crowded anything was because it was just black. It was black. It was just really black. I have 2 little dogs. I had one in my right hand and one on a leash in my left hand. And she got stuck on the stairs, tangled up. And I had to move out of the way so that a firefighter could bring a little child by that had on no clothes, no shoes. And I had to try to untangle her and get her picked up because I couldn't see her. I couldn't hear her. You couldn't see anything. It was just total pitch black. Oh. And as we were trying to go down, fire department was trying to come back up to save more people. It was just really, really help your neighbor, do what you can to help the community. they did a great job, and they saved us.
And Nakia, did you know anyone who was killed or injured in this tragedy?
My sons and them showed me that they at least know 2 of the children who died.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Nakia Gonzalez, we're so happy that you, your nieces, your dogs are out safe. We are thinking about you, and we hope that you're able to get home soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, this morning, U.S. and Russian officials are meeting in Geneva for high-stakes talks aimed at de-escalating tensions over Russia's buildup of troops on its border with Ukraine. Last night, a working dinner was held in preparation for today's talks. But speaking on ABC yesterday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken downplayed expectations for any major developments.
I don't think we're going to see any breakthroughs next week. We're going to listen to their concerns. They'll listen to our concerns, and we'll see if there are grounds for progress. But to make actual progress, it's very hard to see that happening when there's an ongoing escalation, when Russia has a gun to the head of Ukraine with 100,000 troops near its borders, the possibility of doubling that on very short order. So if we're seeing de-escalation, if we're seeing a reduction in tensions, that is the kind of environment in which we could make real progress and, again, address concerns, reasonable concerns on both sides.
We have a team with us to cover this story. NBC News reporter Matt Bodner is in Moscow, and NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee is in Washington. Thank you both for joining us. So, Carol, I'll begin with you and tell us, as we just heard there, Secretary Blinken say, it doesn't seem like there's hope for much to happen here, but what can we expect from today? And are there any signs we could get some positive progress?
Yeah, Savannah, this is really the summit of low expectations. Both sides are saying that they don't expect much to come out of this. And look, the White House went into these talks with really no idea whether or not Russia is serious about reaching some sort of diplomatic resolution to this crisis. Now, the State Department issued a statement after this initial round of discussions with Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, saying the U.S. said she stressed the U.S. commitment to international principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the freedom of sovereign nations to choose their own alliances. They also added that the Deputy Secretary affirmed that the United States would welcome genuine progress through diplomacy. Now, to that end, U.S. officials went into these meetings with a set of various options, both for what the U.S. would do if Russia does further invade in Ukraine, how they would respond, and also what they're calling some confidence-building measures, and meaning what the U.S. is willing to discuss as part of a diplomatic resolution to this. Now, in terms of how the U.S. would respond, they're saying they would do things like very punishing economic sanctions, block Russia from receiving certain technologies, and also increase NATO's presence, troop presence, and military assets in the region if Russia were to invade. In terms of what they're willing to discuss as part of a diplomatic resolution, they're saying they would discuss things like military deployments, missile deployments, and military exercises, the scope and scale of those. Now, the White House says that cuts to U.S. troops in the region that's not on the table, but our own reporting shows that there are ways in which certain options that they are willing to discuss would decrease the U.S. troop presence in the region. But all of that, Savannah, is really for next steps, because first the U.S. has to determine whether or not Russia is serious about this, particularly when the U.S. is saying they're not going to meet some of Russia's key demands.
Absolutely. Let's actually talk exactly about those demands. Matt, I'll bring you in here. So Russia's deputy foreign minister said last night, first, that talks aren't going to be easy, but we also do know this list of demands that Russia's hoping to get out of these talks. Let's talk about those.
Sure, Savannah. Well, Russia's demands are extensive, and just based on the way the United States and NATO have reacted to them, they're obviously unpalatable to Washington, to the Western alliance. They essentially amount to the restoration of the 1997 status quo between NATO and Russia. So that would be reduced presence, reduced borders. They want to see limits on things such as missile deployments and exercises, and really any kind of Western presence in Eastern Europe. Now, the big question, of course, as you mentioned, is Russia serious about these demands? They are, as I mentioned, obviously unpalatable. Actually, the only thing that I can think of that would make them more of a non-starter, again, based on what NATO and the U.S. have said so far, would be including a demand that the eastern members of the bloc are essentially kicked out of NATO. Russia, at least based on the demands, doesn't want to see NATO anywhere close. Now, this is, of course, a very hard bargaining position, and one of the possibilities is that Russia is just staking a really hard line here, hoping for something less, perhaps in agreement on medium-range missiles in Eastern Europe, for example, the kinds of weapons that used to be covered by the INF Treaty. But these are very serious demands from Russia, and we're now just waiting to see, is that serious or is this a negotiating tactic?
Absolutely. So, Carol, we already heard sort of what the White House is willing to do in terms of those demands. But quickly, just tell us, what kind of leverage does the U.S. have in these talks? I mean, how far is Washington willing to go in the event that negotiations break down? And worse, if Russia did invade Ukraine?
Well, that's one of the big questions, is what the leverage is. And from the U.S.'s perspective, their argument is their leverage is that they are very closely aligned with their European partners on how they would respond if Russia were to further invade Ukraine. And so they're saying that they would have punishing economic sanctions, and those would not necessarily have the kind of teeth that they would want if Europe wasn't on board with taking those steps. The administration says that Europe is on board with taking some serious steps that would hurt the Russian economy, and at the same time that they're also willing to, the U.S. is also willing to put a little more skin in the game in terms of military assets in the region. They also say that they would send the more military aid to Ukraine if this were the case. So they feel like they have a number of options. At the same time, it's not clear at all whether it's enough.
Lots to keep our eyes on there. We'll be checking back in. Carol and Matt, thank you both so much for joining us.
Now to the pandemic. The Omicron surge is putting a strain on the nation's healthcare system as more Americans are infected. That includes an increasing number of children. Overnight, the U.S. surpassed 60 million COVID cases since the pandemic began. More than 1 million new cases were reported just over the weekend. Hospitals are now seeing a growing trend. Patients admitted for other ailments are also testing positive for COVID. Doctors say that might mean the COVID case numbers are actually higher than what's currently being reported, that many people out there may have an asymptomatic or undiagnosed case. Doctors are also noting the concerning rise among children in the hospital with COVID. Average daily hospitalizations among kids have increased by 134% over the past 2 weeks. It's especially concerning for kids under 5 who are still not eligible for any of the coronavirus vaccines. NBC News medical reporter Erica Edwards joins me now. So, Erica, doctors say the Omicron variant appears to be affecting kids younger than 5 in a new way. What is it doctors are seeing as more young kids get infected?
Hi, Joe. Good morning. So because the Omicron variant tends to settle a little higher up in the respiratory tract, that's causing a lot of inflammation and swelling in those kids' tiny airways. And as a result, doctors are seeing a big increase in COVID-related croup. That's that barking, sort of seal-like cough that young kids, typically occurring in young children. Again, once you've heard that cough, you know it. It's a loud barking cough. Sometimes they can develop fever, a hoarse voice, and you can also hear it when they are breathing. Now, it's not fun. It's not fun to listen to, but of course, the silver lining here is that croup is generally not harmful. And in fact, doctors have decades and decades of experience treating it. Other viruses also can cause croup. Of course, doctors don't want kids to be infected in the first place. CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky spoke on Fox News yesterday, talking about the best ways to protect children.
The vast majority of children who are in the hospital are unvaccinated. And for those children who are not eligible for vaccination, we do know that they are most likely to get sick with COVID if their family members aren't vaccinated. So the most important thing we can do for those children to keep them out of the hospital is to vaccinate them and to vaccinate their family members around them.
Now, vaccines are not expected for kids under age 5 until later this year. Joe?
Erica, it is not just kids. We're seeing a rise in COVID hospitalizations among all age groups right now, but doctors are now saying a lot of them were not initially admitted for COVID. So what is it that's happening at hospitals around the country?
Yeah, this is a nationwide trend we're hearing that's emerging, where people are coming into the hospital for reasons other than COVID-19, but because of testing policies for any patient who is admitted, they are then finding out that they are COVID-19 positive. Here's what 2 doctors, one in New York, the other in San Francisco, had to say.
They might be having a stroke, they might be having a heart attack, and they just end up being positive just because of the community spread right now.
As of Tuesday, we had 40 adults hospitalized under the designation of COVID positive. But of those 40, only 12 were hospitalized for COVID illness.
Now, while that might be a good sign that Omicron indeed is a little less severe, it could also mean that people are coming in testing positive for COVID-19 before they start feeling sick. And Joe, we know that in general, people are most contagious right before those symptoms begin.
All right, very interesting. Erica, thank you so much.
Let's now bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, good morning. Always great to have you. So let's talk about Omicron and when we could potentially see the end of this. I mean, are we anywhere near the peak of this surge? What could the next few weeks be like?
Yeah, Savannah, good morning. So the next few weeks are going to change depending on where you are. We're already seeing some cases declining in the northeast parts of the country, which is an indication of a peak. But that is still yet to be seen in Midwest and the western parts of the country, where we do think in the next several weeks we'll see a peak. Here's the good news that there can be. Cases should decline rapidly. It's what we've seen in other countries and what we're seeing in parts of the United States.
And Doctor, we just heard from Erica on how Omicron is impacting kids, especially kids younger than 5. So 2 questions for you here. The first one, when do you think that age group will be eligible for the vaccine? But also, we just heard from CDC Director Dr. Walensky on Friday saying that only 16% of kids 5 to 11, those who are already approved for the vaccine, are vaccinated. So really, are the concerns broader than just waiting for the shot for our youngest kids, if that's the stat right now?
Yeah, I do think there were concerns for the 5 to 11 age group about any of these kind of adverse or side effects or events. The CDC just released a report that was very helpful that showed essentially no serious adverse effects. I hope that increases vaccination rates, especially as kids return to school. In terms of the under 5 age group, unfortunately, we are not going to see a vaccine in time for this particular surge. We estimate the second quarter of this year will be when Pfizer has the sufficient data. They had to add a 3rd dose for the under 5 age set because of the initial data not being effective or efficacious enough. So hopefully around the April-May timeframe.
All right, great info there for parents. Dr. Kavita Patel, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
2022 is off to a busy start. This week on Meet the Press, the focus is on schools, once again faced with difficult choices about remote learning as Omicron cases surge.
Yeah, plus after the anniversary of the January 6th riots on Capitol Hill, where does the House committee stand on its investigation? Moderator Chuck Todd covers this and more in this week's Meet the Press Compressed.
Good morning, Savannah and Joe. On this week's Meet the Press, positive COVID test results, hospitalizations, and deaths are all heading in the wrong direction. They're heading up. Meanwhile, the CDC's muddled messaging continues to erode confidence, and schools are struggling with closures. I spoke with the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, and a pair of infectious disease experts, Drs. Emanuel and Gounder. Plus, my interview with Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger on January 6th and the future of the GOP. Here are some of the most important answers from Meet the Press Compressed. Are kids going to be in school this week in Chicago?
Well, I'm doing everything I can to make sure that happens. And to be clear, what the Chicago Teachers Union did was an illegal walkout. They abandoned their posts and they abandoned kids and their families. We are working diligently every single day at the bargaining table to narrow the differences and to get a deal done. My team has been working every single day. They're back at it again here Sunday. They were at it yesterday. And we can get a deal done if there's goodwill on both sides. But fundamentally, what we cannot do is abandon the science. We know that the safest place for kids to be is in-person learning in schools. And we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars to make our schools safe. They are safe. We've got the data to demonstrate that. We've got to get the teachers union to get real and get serious about getting back into in-person learning.
You guys are saying what others have been saying. This is not a pandemic anymore. It's an endemic. So what changes have to happen now?
The proposal is we need a strategic plan for that covers vaccines, getting more people vaccinated. And the only way to do that, as we've been very clear over time, is mandates. We got voluntarily to about 60%, but to get beyond that, we are going to need the employer mandate that OSHA's put out, the healthcare mandate that CMS has put out. We need to improve our ventilation system. We need to get more therapies and get the link between a positive test and getting a therapy much closer so you can actually start in 3 days and not only the rich and well-off get it. Those are the kinds of things we need to put in place over the next 3 months to be prepared when COVID is really just in the air. It's going to be here. We're going to learn to live with it.
What we're really proposing is let's focus on what matters the most, hospitalizations and deaths. That's what we focus on for other respiratory illnesses like the flu, like RSV. How do we do a better job of preventing those hospitalizations, those deaths, particularly among the most vulnerable, so the elderly, people who are highly immunocompromised, people who are living in long-term care facilities, and of course, communities of color and others that have been highly vulnerable during this pandemic.
If you got no more information submitted to this committee right now, how much of the story do you think you have?
I think a significant part. I think where we're at right now, we know a lot of the narrative. And as I've said, I think the most important thing is not even the day of January 6th, it's what led to it. We have a lot of what's out there in the public venue, what the president himself said. The fact that he was watching for 3 hours on TV, probably gleefully while this happened. So I think if everything shut down today, we'd be able to put out a powerful and substantive narrative. We still have more information, obviously, we want to get.
All right, our thanks to Chuck Todd for that recap.
This morning, tributes are pouring in for actor and comedian Bob Saget, who died suddenly yesterday at the age of 65. He was best known for playing Danny Tanner, a single father on Full House, and for hosting America's Funniest Home Videos. Saget was on a stand-up comedy tour. He was found dead Sunday in a hotel room in Orlando. Authorities say they saw no signs of drug use or foul play. The medical examiner will ultimately determine the cause of death. Entertainment journalist and pop culture expert Brian Balthazar joins us now with more on this. Brian, good morning to you. So, Saget starred in some massive TV hits over the years, especially in the 80s and 90s, usually playing a family-friendly character, but he had an even longer career on stage as a stand-up comic, sometimes doing some pretty edgy material. Talk a little about these different sides of his persona and really just the legacy he leaves behind.
Sure. So I'm actually in Abington, Pennsylvania, where he went to high school, and he was married just blocks from me. So he's close to New York City. You know, he grew up in Philadelphia, and he got his comedy chops in New York City, surrounded by some racy comedy. And though we came to know him as Dad, as one of the characters on Full House, he, in fact, had quite a racy, raunchy side, and he really showed that in his stand-up comedy. And I think in his later years really kind of played to that, because he could be raunchy, he could be blue, but he also was an actor, and he could play a character. So some people knew him from one thing. I guess that a whole generation of kids did. And then you could go out to a comedy show and be like, wow, this is a different Bob Saget. But what was universal about Bob was that the Hollywood community truly, truly found him to be one of the nicest, most kind and generous people in the business and that they knew in general. So I think that really speaks to the kind of person he was. He was more than just an actor. He was more than just a comic. He was a really wonderful, kind and generous human being.
The thread you see in almost all the comments about him over the last, 12 hours or so is just how nice and kind he was. By the way, there's a movie called The Aristocrats that I highly recommend folks check out. A little bit raunchy, but Bob Saget's a part of that one. Overnight, we did hear...
just a little bit raunchy. Yes, exactly.
Just a warning. Overnight, we did hear from some of the former cast members who knew Saget best. What are some of them saying?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the whole cast is really gutted by this, starting with Candace Cameron Bure. She said, "I don't know what to say. I have no words. Bob was one of the best human beings I've ever known in my life. I loved him so much." Dave Coulier, an actor and comic who also shared the stage with him. "My heart is broken. I love you, Bob. Your forever brother, Dave." And John Stamos, "I am broken. I am gutted. I am in complete and utter shock. I will never, ever have another friend like him. I love you so much, Bobby." And then we have Ashley and Mary-Kate Olsen, who shared a role on Full House. And they said, "Bob was the most loving, compassionate, and generous man. We are deeply saddened that he is no longer with us, but know that he will continue to be by our side and guide us as gracefully as he always has." That, of course, the cast of Full House, but the whole Hollywood community, from Norman Lear to Gilbert Gottfried, Nikki Glaser. Pete David even said that he helped him get through some mental health problems. So a lot of people are expressing their condolences today.
Quite a legacy. All right, Brian, thanks so much for helping us remember. We do appreciate it.
Time now to get a check on your morning news now weather.
Bill Cairns is with us. Bill, good morning.
Good morning, guys. I'm afraid I'm becoming very predictable with my complaints.
I think that might be true. But we'll hear them anyway.
You see,
We're here for you.
Yeah, you will. See, there's only 2 or 3 times every winter where I'm like, why don't I have a remote car starter? It's not that difficult. They're not all that expensive. All you do is you push a button, the car starts, it gets warm, and then you can go out when it's a freezing cold morning. I mean, in Minnesota, it's like a requirement, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, well. So, all right, let's get into this. The Arctic blast that's coming down is going to have a lot of people wondering why they don't have remote car starters in the next 2 or 3 days. In some cases, this will be the coldest air we've seen in 3 winters, going all the way back to 2019. And this morning, that Arctic blast is starting to come down out of Canada. It's already moved into International Falls, where the wind chill currently is -38. Not a fun morning in Minneapolis with a temperature of -7, wind chill of -24. And all of this cold air is heading for the northeast as we go throughout the day today and into tomorrow. So here's the forecast for this afternoon. This is not horrible. Yes, not fun in Minneapolis, up to International Falls, Green Bay included, Duluth. But the Great Lakes in the Northeast, this is just the cold air starting. You'll really feel it with the wind chills as we wake up Tuesday morning. New York City, -1. Oh, look at northern New England. Saranac Lake, -38 towards Lake Placid. So very cold, easily the coldest this winter. And as I mentioned, the coldest in years. And then it just doesn't warm up Tuesday afternoon. We're going to stay below freezing, even with the sunshine in Caribou and northern portions of Maine. Boston only at 12. New York, a high of only 19 degrees. So you get the idea. But the good news with this one, it's in and it's out. So it's a quick blast of 2 days of very cold air, and then we warm it up and moderate it as we go towards the end of the week. So as far as the forecast goes for today, guys, there's also lake effect snow, but we don't have any big snowstorms this week or ice. It's just cold weather complaints from this house.
Ooh, yeah, cold, cold, cold. I heard it's pretty much just going to drop today from the time that we got out here, and it was already cold this morning.
Yeah. It's going to be a long one, I guess.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Bill.
Good to see you, Bill.
Coming up, a new twist in the vaccine controversy involving tennis star Novak Djokovic. The new developments overnight from an Australian courtroom as he challenges the cancellation of his visa ahead of the Australian Open.
Plus, overcoming Omicron. A look at the global efforts to fight the fast-spreading variant and what the case rates overseas could mean for the fight here in the U.S. You're watching Morning News Now. Welcome back. We have a big update on the Novak Djokovic saga. An Australian judge has ruled that Djokovic must be released from immigration detention in Melbourne and allowed to stay in the country. The Serbian star won his appeal after Australian authorities detained him when he arrived in the country over his COVID-19 vaccination status. The #1 ranked player in the world has become a lightning rod for controversy over past anti-vaccine comments. The legal win is a big step towards allowing Djokovic to play in the Australian Open. But the battle isn't over yet. The government has said the immigration minister may use his personal power to cancel Djokovic's visa a second time. So we'll keep our eyes on that.
Let's take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Claudio Lavanga is with us today from Rome. Hey, Claudio, good morning.
Morning, Savannah. Morning, Joe. Well, 10 people were killed and 32 more were injured after their boats were struck by a huge rock that detached from a cliff overlooking a Brazilian lake, which is also a popular tourist destination. Now, an amateur video shows a fellow holidaymaker warning the others about the imminent disaster before the cliff collapses on the boats beneath. And a fire raged through a refugee camp in Bangladesh on Sunday, where up to 1 million refugees from neighboring Myanmar live. Hundreds of homes were destroyed, leaving many refugees from the persecuted Rohingya minority without shelter, while it's still not clear whether there were any casualties. And a baby from Afghanistan who got separated from his parents at Kabul airport during the chaotic evacuation from Afghanistan last year has been found and reunited with his relatives. Now, the boy was just 2 months old when he was handed in desperation to a U.S. soldier across an airport wall. While his parents eventually made it to the plane and to the U.S., they couldn't find the baby anymore in the airport, while he was found by a local taxi driver in Kabul who took him home. Well, now, fortunately, one of those horrific stories ended well. Guys?
Absolutely. Oh, that's great to hear.
Good to see a happy ending there. All right.
Yeah. Thank you, Claudio. Good to see you.
There may be new hope in the fight against the Omicron variant. Countries around the world are now reporting a decrease in COVID cases after the variant was first detected nearly 2 months ago. What's even more encouraging, the number of COVID deaths remained relatively low, suggesting Omicron is less deadly than previous variants. Health experts in the U.S. are now looking to other countries for clues about how the variant will play out here at home. NBC News correspondent Matt Bradley has more.
Tonight, as the Omicron variant tears through the U.S., news from overseas offers a glimmer of hope. In South Africa, where Omicron was first identified, the startling spike in cases was followed by an equally sudden decline. Last month, hospitals were packed. But now the mood in Cape Town's Christian Barnard Memorial Hospital appears almost placid.
This is another day in the ICU of ours, which normally operates at 100% occupancy, now with about 50% of occupancy for COVID-positive patients.
Dr. Shikhar Motilla advises calm for other countries now dealing with Omicron.
Had we seen high infection rates translate to high disease rates, that would have been a reason for concern. However, we have not seen a greater severity of disease with the current variant of Omicron.
In fact, the death rate in South Africa has barely risen. Dr. Angelique Coetzee is credited with first identifying the new Omicron variant.
What can the United States expect to see based on South Africa's experience?
Definitely high cases, a high number of cases, but you look at your death rate and you look at your ICU cases. So it doesn't matter how high your positivity rate is, as long as your hospitals are not overwhelmed.
The head of the CDC suggested Friday the U.S. may mimic part of South Africa's experience.
I do think in places that we are seeing this really steep incline, that we may well see also a precipitous decline, but we're also a much bigger country than South Africa.
Doctors caution that South Africa's experience is unique. It's summer there and the population is younger, but here in London, South Africa's experience is having a sequel. Here, cases spiked from Omicron, but in the past few days have started to drop. Hospitals have been overwhelmed, but that's more because of too few staff rather than too many COVID patients. Doctors and nurses have had to call in sick after testing positive. In fact, hospitalizations in London have increased only gradually compared to last year, even as COVID cases spiked. And two key statistics that speak to the severity of the disease: the number of patients on ventilators and deaths have barely risen. There's no guarantee the U.S. follows the same path, especially since a greater percentage of the population is vaccinated in the UK. But global stats show that when it comes to Omicron, there's cause for optimism. Like many countries throughout the world, UK authorities have decided that instead of posing new restrictions in the face of this Omicron variant, they're going to rely on a vaccine booster campaign, and they've really picked up the pace. Matt Bradley, NBC News, London.
Matt, thank you.
All right, coming up, privacy concerns over a popular Apple product.
Halfway home, I got the notification that was like, someone's tracking you and has been for a while.
When we return on Morning News now, the warning about AirTags and what Apple has to say about the problem.
Wedding bells are ringing here at NBC News now. Our very own Morgan Radford married David Williams over the weekend, hosting a breathtaking wedding ceremony in Cartagena, Colombia. The couple was surrounded by family and friends. Look at these gorgeous pictures during the intimate celebration. Morgan looked stunning, of course, in a dress from Australian couture house Lea de Gloria. She paired it with a long veil and some statement earrings. She and David met at Harvard back in 2007, but didn't start dating until 2017. Then they got engaged in 2019, but were forced to delay their May 2020 wedding due to the pandemic. Morgan said, quote, "It feels incredible to be married," and says she now understands why people describe their weddings as the best day of their lives. Congrats to Morgan and David from all of us here, your Morning News Now family. And she really does look just so beautiful.
Good for them. Absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I know it is. So
Congratulations. Exciting. All right. Police are reporting a disturbing new trend involving Apple location devices. AirTags are now being used to track people without their knowledge. A Sports Illustrated model says she was stalked by a stranger after he planted an Apple AirTag on her at a bar. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard has more.
Multiple police departments and several women sounding the alarm about an Apple product that can track one's whereabouts without them knowing.
Check your belongings, check your surroundings. It was the scariest moment ever.
The company began selling AirTags last year and now increasing concerns over potential nefarious use. Model Brooks Nader posted on her Instagram Thursday that she believes someone put one of the tracking devices into her jacket at a restaurant bar.
Once I was already on my walk home, halfway home, I got a notification that was like, someone's tracking you and has been for a while.
She says her iPhone alerted her to the AirTag device. NBC News has not been able to confirm Nader's account.
The concern is that an AirTag, it's this small. My producer Kevin just picked this up from the Apple store. He paired it up to his phone. We're gonna slip this into my jacket pocket and he's gonna track me all the way home.
After a subway ride for both of us and miles apart, now Kevin's app can see where me and the AirTag went.
Is the use of a GPS tracking device like this to follow someone, to stalk them, is that illegal?
When the tracking crosses the line to harassment or stalking, and there is no legitimate purpose for it, it becomes harassing and it becomes stalking. That, Vaughn, is illegal.
Police departments in multiple states have reported misuse of AirTags, including for domestic stalking and trying to steal cars. One in New York saying it had 2 reports in a month and urged residents to, quote, immediately contact the police or drive to the nearest police station. Apple says it set up its notification system as precaution to alert people that they may unknowingly be victims of stalking. The company in a statement writing in part, AirTag is designed with a set of proactive features to discourage unwanted tracking, a first in the industry that both inform users if an unknown AirTag might be with them and deter bad actors from using an AirTag for nefarious purposes.
Super anxious, and I'm already an anxious person, so it totally didn't help.
Kimberly Stroop in Arizona says she received one of those alerts in September.
I don't leave my house I stopped any routine I had.
And you changed gyms.
I switched gyms, yeah.
She says she even sold her car. Anxiety still months later. And she says she walked into her local police department to report it.
Law enforcement told you that they wouldn't even take a report?
They didn't take my name. They didn't take my phone number. They didn't take a single thing.
We reached out to the police department, but they said they were unable to find an incident from that day. Our legal analyst says that action should be taken in similar situations.
If someone gets a notification on their phone that they have an AirTag that was unknowingly attached to them, and they go to law enforcement, what obligation does law enforcement have?
When they receive a complaint that there is harassment based on the placement or unknown placement of that type of device, they have the obligation to investigate.
I had no idea that these existed until it happened to me, so I'm kind of just trying to raise awareness and tell all my ladies out there to watch your belongings.
Our thanks to Vaughn Hilliard for that important story. It's getting a lot of talk right now.
Absolutely something to watch out for. All right, college loans are putting students and parents deep into debt.
Coming up, we're going to get a firsthand look at the impacts of America's growing student debt and how it's changing the lives and the futures of millions of Americans. It's no secret the price for college is eye-popping. Students are jumping through all kinds of hoops to get that degree, including federal work-study and private and federal loans, but sometimes even that is not enough.
Yeah, more and more parents and guardians are taking out these enormous loans year after year, even when they're not sure how they'll pay them off. NBC News correspondent Zinkley Esimwal reports on America's growing student debt.
Your U.S. Department of Education student loan servicer.
How do you feel getting those messages?
Oh, it gives me anxiety because I know I have to face paying this.
Patricia Rizzo took out 7 Parent Plus loans over 8 semesters to get her daughter Emily Rizzo through Skidmore College.
Would your daughter have been able to go to school without the Parent Plus loan?
No. This was the bulk of the tuition.
The Department of Education limits the amount of federal loans students qualify for per year, so families can turn to another federal option, Plus, also known as Direct Plus or Parent Plus loans. These allow parents or guardians to take out loans for their dependents. For Rizzo, her interest rates on Plus loans vary from 6 to 7%.
The scary part is how much interest it accrues over time. The principal is $100,000, but I accrued $26,000 in interest, and this is my balance right now, $126,167.
What started as a decision to improve her daughter's future has now impacted the possibilities for her own.
And what I'm looking at right now is paying it over 20 years, which will make me 82.
82? What about retirement?
I can't think about retiring.
Recent surveys find 26% of parents with PLUS loan debt will not retire as initially planned. The PLUS program, beginning in the 1980s, now facing a different U.S. economy. The average amount of student loan debt for borrowers over 60 roughly doubled from 2005 to 2015. And for borrowers over 60, most of that debt is for their children.
Traditionally, this loan was developed to help parents who were middle income be able to afford a four-year education. Instead, we're seeing it be more and more lower income or middle income families get in over their heads on this debt.
These loans can cover up to the cost of attendance, so long as borrowers pass a credit check, meaning some parents are borrowing much more than they can afford. In Rizzo's case, she earns around $40,000 a year working at a drug rehab center in New Jersey. The 62-year-old plans to pay the loan off, but has not started making payments. As debt climbs, so too does public debate.
Debt, they would get relief.
Canceling student loan debt. $50,000.
Paying their student loan and paying the rent.
The Biden administration paused student loan payments until May 1st, 2022. For those struggling to pay these loans, there are options, including a federal direct consolidation loan, talking to loan servicers about interest, being mindful of refinancing in the private market, and knowing that declaring bankruptcy for student debt is hard. That's according to Fishman, not a financial expert, but an expert in education policy. She adds that if not paid, the government can come after Social Security, wages, tax refunds, and it can negatively impact credit.
We really need to focus on improving affordability for low and middle income families so that we aren't having to rely on intergenerational debt.
Do you regret taking on the Parent Plus loan?
I can't say I regret because my daughter has accomplished so much.
How did you feel when she crossed that stage?
She went above and beyond, and I was very proud of her.
That was Zincle Esamoah reporting on a very important topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Now it's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Dominic Chu is with us this morning. Dom, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Savannah. Well, gas prices are inching lower, although that could just be a temporary phenomenon. The average price of regular unleaded gasoline dropping 2 cents over the past 3 weeks to $3.39 a gallon. That's still more than $1 higher than it was the same time last year. Analysts say prices could start going up again as crude oil prices are on the rise. Ford is trying to prevent its new all-electric F-150 Lightning model from being bought and then flipped by owners. CNET reports Ford has given dealers the option to add a no-sale provision to their contracts. That would force buyers of the car to agree not to sell or transfer the ownership of that truck before they've owned it for a year. Ford says about 200,000 people have put down deposits on that F-150 Lightning, which will start shipping in the first half of this year. And Disney is looking for people to head up social media efforts at its theme parks. You got to be passionate about Disneyland and Disney World, food, and, of course, TikTok. The company is looking for a social media savant who knows all the latest trends on that video sharing app. If this does sound like you, head over to Disney's online career site and apply. Savannah, Joe, I am not as savvy when it comes to things like social media, and I don't think I've posted any videos of myself in quite some time.
That's okay. I think they'll have no shortage of applicants, though, beyond the three of us.
And
so.
how fun does that sound also to just do? We both love Disney.
That is someone's dream job. I think, right
absolutely.
There.
How cool. All right, Dom.
What kid doesn't love Disney, by the way,
exactly.
right? So.
Well, and even us. Yeah. All right, Dom. Thanks. Good to see you.
You got it.
Coming up, man on a mission. A Texas police officer going to great lengths to serve his community.
If I make contact with one person that changes one person's life, then mission accomplished.
Up next on Morning News Now, his off-duty efforts to put smiles on the faces of kids in need.
We're back with some news that should brighten your morning. One everyday American is showing us how to give back to our communities.
That's right. Christopher Douglas is a Texas police officer, and he's using his newfound superpowers to make sure all the kids in his town feel special in their own way. You'll see what we mean. NBC News senior national correspondent Kate Snow has the details.
This is a story about a real-life superhero, a police officer who took on a new mission to help kids.
Growing up, Christopher Douglas always wanted to serve his community and country, joining the Air Force and later becoming an officer with the Midlothian, Texas Police Department. But beyond fighting crime, he has another mission: to help change the lives of local children.
How did this all start?
Well, about 4.5 years ago, and just wanted to do a little something more. And I remember seeing somebody dressed as Spider-Man visiting sick kids in hospitals. And I thought, man, what an awesome idea. Thanks to my wife pushing me and motivating me to get the Captain America shield that we saw one day in the mall, and everything else is history.
The superhero going above and beyond to help kids at community events, in the hospital, and others with special needs. Like 6-year-old Michael Murphy, who was born with a rare condition that makes it hard for him to eat, breathe, and hear.
First day of kindergarten.
Officer Douglas and other first responders showed up to make his first day of school a little less scary.
When they arrived at the school, Captain America got out and was giving high fives to the kids. It was unforgettable.
For Michael's mom, Brittany, Officer Douglas has been a lifeline.
When your kid has differences, you just want them to be accepted.
What do you hope to bring to these kids?
I want to bring a certain level of joy, compassion, just general positivity.
Positivity and joy for kids like 12-year-old Alex Espino, who has autism. Officer Douglas showed up to be part of his birthday parade. And when it came time for Alex to get a COVID shot, Mom Elvia says he stepped in once again.
I called Officer Douglas and I said, Alex is a little bit scared. Can you walk him through it? He said, sure, give me a couple minutes. Officer Douglas has taken on this role because Alex wants to grow up one day and save the world.
He wants to be a superhero.
Yeah.
Small gestures with big impact that Officer Douglas says he's hoping will catch on.
If I make contact with one person that changes one person's life, then mission accomplished. If they do that to somebody else, then there's no going back from that.
Officer Douglas told me that he has a Mandalorian costume on the way. That'll be for his next superhero missions. Back to you.
How sweet is that? Kate Snow, thanks so much.
Good for him. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.